A very good morning to all of you. Today we would be discussing one of the most important aspects, and that is how to write good. All of you, I believe, if you have read a concept can express it, but when you express it, the same student who is expressing it in one way receives, let's say, 8 out of 10, the other students get 4 out of 10. So how can you actually score good when you are writing? And that is mainly determined by your writing skills. So today we would be focusing on some of the most important aspects of this writing skill. It could be applicable to students appearing for board exams, school students as well as university students. So let's understand a very first question that I have for you. We have a bullet train running here. Now, can you think actually what has this to relate to this class? Obviously, yes, it has a lot to relate. Now, understand when this train runs, it knows where is the origin, where is the destination, and what path to follow. Similarly, when you are writing your answers, you must know the origin of the thoughts, the way through which you would be expressing your thoughts, and finally, what would be your conclusion or your destination. If that is not organized, it would happen what happened with one of the Shramik Express trains yesterday. Rather than reaching Gorakhpur, it reached Raulkela. So most of you start your answer writing with one point and end up to another point. And the thing is, the continuum gets broken. And this broken continuum basically is one of the reasons because of which you score less marks. Also, you can introduce contemporary information as we did right now with the example of the Shramik train. So whenever you are writing your answers, your thought process must be an organized process. Now, what do we mean by this organized process? As simple as that, let's move into a lift or an elevator. Now, when you are moving into this lift, you have the buttons that are seen. Now, these buttons could be in various forms. Now we have three cases that are here. Now my question is for you, which of the case do you think is the most best case that is there, and which of the cases do you think is not a suitable case? So we have, I repeat again, three cases that we have drawn here. Now you have to understand what is the difference between these three cases. So looking for your responses. Anikesh has answered last one. Okay. Why, Anikesh? Also put in the reasons along with the selection that you make, whether it is the first case, the second case, or the third case. Soma, very good, has the answer the first case. Okay. Any other who has a response other than the first case? Now, when you are writing your answers, you have to be very, very careful that you have to make sure that examiner who is checking your copies is also a person. Now, when that examiner is also a person, what kind of answer do you think would he or she like the best? Aditya has answer middle one. Okay, Robin, very good. Case 1 appears organized, so perfect. Now here we have case 1 that appears organized, and that's what we were meaning when we are talking about the case of train. From understanding the origin to the destination, it should be a streamlined flow. There should not be abrupt jerks that should be there in the answer. Let's say you are asked a question about the mechanism of pumping of the heart. Now, when you are attempting that question, suddenly you start with the pulmonary artery going to the lungs, and then what would happen? You forget what was asked in the question, and you would start explaining the respiratory system. So what happens is you have an abrupt jerk that has happened here in the question paper. And that is one of the major reasons why you score less. Now the second case is this only. What happens is you have the flow that is divided. Now rather than having, as you can see, a perfect flow of 1, 2, 3, 4, you have haphazard numbers that are seen. Now these haphazard numbers are one of the reasons that you are not able to have a streamlined flow of thought. Also, in the case 3, what happens is you have a break in the information. So I have just eaten up some of the information. I think the examiner knows it, so why to write it? So that's what happens. We would catch up with this point later again when we are talking about too concise or too elaborate answers. So right now the idea is this is the most systematic flow of answer that should be there, and that would come when you have an answer to write. You spend at least 30 seconds to 45 seconds giving a brainstorming for that, understanding what to write and what would be your flow of thoughts. Once you are done with that, then start writing. Don't just see a question and impromptly start writing. So that's not a good strategy. The next important thing that we understand is knowledge. Now definitely if you don't know, there is a big issue what to write. So you would either leave your copies blank or you would fill in something which is not at all relevant to the content. Now what happens usually in this scenario? In this scenario, what happens is that you are not able to express the exact points, and the same happens with the examiner. He is not able to express and give you the good marks. So be sure, be very careful that knowledge is key. Until and unless you know that subject, you know that topic, if you are starting with unnecessary writings, it's totally and totally useless. It is futile. You won't get any significant marks. Let's say if it is a 10-mark question, the best you can get is 1 or 2 marks. If you are leaving it blank, definitely no marks. So that is how you have the one very important aspect. The next important question that comes in is diagrams. Now again, I have 2 diagrams which we have taken as sample here, and the third one which I would be drawing, as most of the answer copies that we see do. Now what do you think is the difference between the 2 diagrams? Which of the diagrams, let's mark it again, 1 and 2, do you think is a much better diagram in terms of depicting in your answer copy? So again, in the cases of diagrams, we have various aspects that need to be discussed which are not mentioned in these diagrams that are there per se. We would be discussing that in a while. Now, how do you understand which diagram do you think would score more marks when it comes to checking your answers? So, why do you think there is a particular segment of students who secure good marks? Anikesh, very good. The first one is more detailed and recognizable. Very good. So what happens here is you have 2 aspects that you have taken. I am making the examples very simple, so even a basic school student could understand till a college student. So here we have either the shoot system or the root system. So simply put, what we have done is we have demarcated the shoot system and the root system on one end and the rest of the all labelings on one end, and therefore this diagram is much more clear and comprehensible. However, in the other scenario, what happens is I am having some labeling on this side, some labeling on this side, some labeling in the middle, and it's all haphazard. However, in the first diagram it appears much more systematic. Now, few points to note which are not part of this diagrams that are given here. Always when you are marking a diagram, put an arrow towards the name. Most of the diagrams you would find have an arrow towards the diagram itself. So you would have an arrow on this edge. This is not a right way to put a mark. What you need to put a mark here is towards the name, because it would give much more clarity and much more systematic way in which the presentation could be done. So that is the first point to note. The second point to note is, let's say this is the diagram. In this diagram, what happens is, sometimes what you would do is you would write flower, and then you would, from here you would take an arrow here, cross this line and say this is internode. You would take another line. If it is all filled up here, you won't have space. You would take another line which would be crossing this and going somewhere, and you would write it as fruit. Rather than writing a stem here where you have a lot of empty portion, you would again try to go into this region and mark it as a stem. So this whole region this has now is kind of cluttered and you cannot read any of the information, again the examiner would have difficulty going through which is the internode, because this arrow goes here and crosses three of the arrows and goes down. So this makes it much more difficult to comprehend. So make sure whenever you are writing your diagrams, whenever you are drawing your diagrams, they have to be neatly labeled. Drawing is one of the aspects, we would come onto it in a minute later, but the most priority is a good labeling. Only and only if you can label your diagrams correctly, that makes a real sense out of it. Okay, usually we have seen students are there who draw the diagrams, but even after drawing the diagrams, they don't label it. If you don't label it, there is no point. If I draw a very beautiful diagram of, let's say, a plant with shoot system, root system, nicely drawn, nicely colored, but not at all labeled, it would secure me no marks. Reason, it's not a paper for drawing, it's a paper which is meant for science students. So definitely you would have to label the parts. So that is the first thing. The next is, how do you sketch? Now there are very funny answers that come. Most of the time I have seen students either not able to sketch. If you are not able to sketch, don't get distressed, because the reason is, most of the times if there is a complicated figure, if there is a difficult shape that is there, it's hard to depict it. So you can simplify it by certain means. Let's say if you want to draw the map of India and you find it difficult to draw the whole of the map, so what you do is, rather drawing the whole of the map, you just draw the bottom half of the map, and that would represent most of the things. Now even with this map, I can represent India to the best of it, and if I am not able to draw the upper part, that's totally fine. On the other hand, what happens is, what I have seen with many of the students, they draw a map like this, saying that we were told that this is a kind of good map that is there for India. Now definitely there is no accuracy for it, but there is a better accuracy, if not 100% as compared to a real map. You have a much higher accuracy for this map as compared to this map. So don't draw funny diagrams, which I would say. It would, rather than gaining you marks, would definitely lose you a lot of marks, considering the fact that you are not well versed with it. So why to introduce it? It is better to leave it, not to draw, than to draw funny diagrams. Okay. So it's very important. Kusum has a very good question, how to draw countries in a simple way. So definitely I have received this request from many of the students, and we would be covering these in the upcoming classes. Binny again has a question, how to draw easy and systematic diagrams. So we would be covering a series of lectures on which we would be talking about some of the diagrams from biology, world maps, which could be drawn with simplicity. Shanu has another very good question, whether we should use heavy words or simple words to explain the concept. Now, the thing is, you should use technical vocabulary. Let's say you are attempting a paper of science and you are talking about a too simple vocabulary which is not at all scientific. Definitely it would be correct, but it won't be accurate. So bringing your answer to accuracy is equally important as you are writing your answer. So make it a point that your technical vocabulary should not lose while you are answering and attempting your questions. So these two are very good questions by Kusum and Shanu. Definitely we would be considering more lectures on these as we proceed, a very applicable aspect. The next most important thing that I usually tell students is contemporary information. Now definitely any topic that you study, you have some or the other contemporary happening with it. Let's say take a very simple example. You have essay that is being asked on zoonotic diseases, for example. Because of the COVID-19 recently, you have zoonotic diseases that have come a lot in limelight. Now these are the diseases spread through various animals, mainly the rodents, bats and primates. Now what are the causes. You would write a note about the various diseases, whether they are bacterial, viral, how much deadly they are, how much contagious they are, the regions in which they are seen, the spatial aspect, the temporal changes that have been registered over the years, why they have been significantly increased. But in this, if you bring in a case study, let's say of Merck's, which was the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, which said that the transmission happened from bats to camels and finally to human beings, or let's say Nipah virus, where it is spread from bats to pigs and finally human beings. And take a simple example of Indonesia, how the clearing of the forest happened in the regions of Indonesia, and because of this deforestation, what happened was most of the bats have to leave the region of Indonesia and they had to find out new homes. Now the new homes they could find was in the regions of Malaysia. What happened, most of the piggeries that were there was surrounded by fruit orchards. Now fruit orchards was one of the reasons that these bats, the fruit bats, started to settle there. And as we know, bats, the fruit bats, are mainly frugivorous. That means they require high energy for flight and they consume mainly the sugars of the fruit and they throw away the remaining part. And when they throw away the remaining part, which is contaminated with their saliva, you have that is being consumed by the pigs in this example, and therefore the disease is spread to pig. And the people who were managing those piggeries, the disease is spread from the pigs to those human beings and finally to the human chain. So that is one of the contemporary information that you are trying to bring in this example of zoonotic virus. The similar was the case of coronavirus. As per the researches done so far, it is spread from bats to pangolins and finally to human beings. So that is how you bring in a contemporary information. Again, a very, very important aspect. The next is representation. Now, what do we mean by representation? Now, representation could come up in various ways. It could be in the form of tables, it could be in the form of diagrams, it could be in the form of flowcharts, graphs, or whatsoever. Let's say a very simple example. I am trying to depict the area of United States. Now, in this map, what I'm trying to do is, I'm trying to draw the map of Africa and then represent United States and show how big is United States in contrast to Africa. Similarly, we can take examples of various other aspects and compare it to other phenomena. So there could be an idea of compare and contrast, and these kind of representation usually bring a life to your answer. So try to make your answers much more lively, much more closer to reality, and the more closer to reality they are, the more impressive answers that are there, and definitely more marks as of it. So that is one of the major things. Okay, the next important is Kinjal has a question here, a very good question. How is it important to write answers in points? Now, I do not recommend that always you write your answers in points. Let's say you have a question about one of the theories. You start with what is the theory, the aim of the theory. That should not be a requirement that this should be in points. But when you start with the benefits of the theory versus the drawbacks of the theory, those could be in the points that, let's say, these are the 5 benefits and these are the 5 drawbacks. I won't pick up specific examples because you have a huge set of people who are there from varied age groups. So I would be just keeping the explanation very, very simple. And then Shanu has a question. One-liner questions or comprehension questions or complex sentences with lot of information, we usually don't recommend that. Keep your sentences short and sweet, and that would make your content much more meaningful and much more easier for the examiner to comprehend. That is very, very important. Research paper writing अब है varies a little from your answer writing, because answer writing is very, very factual. What you know, you are just putting it. However, when you are doing a research paper writing, we have covered a series of lectures on research writing, which is different, which is a totally different concept. And the idea here is you are trying to focus on the findings. You are trying to analyze what you have done. So research findings are one of the major bases based on which you would have the whole paper that you would be writing. Here it is much more factual and much more direct, that is is there. The next question is by Nehal. How to link different dimensions of an answer to maintain continuity, especially in short answers? Yes, so that is a very, very important question. Usually with social sciences, you have to bring in this interdisciplinary approach. So this is what we call as an interdisciplinary approach. Let's say you have a question. Again, I take the same example, which is the most recent example of COVID. Now here, again, you have the economic perspective, the economic implication, the social implications, the psychological implications of alienation that are seen. So there are various aspects that are covered. I'm trying to move from economics to sociology to psychology, and then the origin of the disease, so a little of scientific approach there. So that is where we say there is a interdisciplinary approach, and that's very, very important. Be it a short answer or long answer, it depends how much interdisciplinary aspects you want to merge. You can write the same thing in one sentence, as I said, and you can elaborate each of these points again under 5 or 10 points, bring in the most important coverages. 1 mark questions, Shushma, are usually direct. They are to the point. They do not require unnecessary information that should be written there. Shashikala has a question: should we write more standard words in our answer, or should we write simple words? As I said, the sentence formation should be simple, but the words should be standard. They should not be simplified. There should be a clear-cut feeling that you know the subject. And if you are using everything in a simple language, it would reveal that you don't know the subject. Okay. So that's again a very important thing that you must keep in mind. The next is the types of questions. Now this is a separate class we have covered. So you can just scan this QR code to go to this lecture. And here we have covered the kind of phrases that are usually asked with each of the questions. Sometimes it is asked, throw a light on this concept, or enumerate, or critically describe. So what are the difference between these terms? And this is very, very important. Small differences, but major differences. So be very particular about what is asked in the question, and for these details I would recommend you would watch this lecture. I had already provided this in the link shared in the post today. The next is a right balance. Now this is another very good thing that you must understand. Sometimes students are too concise versus sometimes students are too elaborate. You have to find a right balance. So it should not be a comparison of ant versus a dinosaur, because the examiner who is checking your answers have a pile of papers that are coming up. Now with this pile, if one of the students write one sentence and the other write 4 pages, or let's say one of the students write 3 lines and another write 4-5 pages, it becomes very hard for the examiner, because understand this, whenever you are graded in a subjective paper, it is relative grading. It's not absolute grading. When it's an MCQ pattern, if it is yes, marks. If it is no, no marks. Okay, so if it is incorrect, no marks. But that does not happen with a subjective aspect. Understand a fact that when it is a subjective copy, there is a unexplained biasness in the mind of examiner. When I say biasness, it does not imply that the examiner would be knowing whose copy it is. No, not in that sense, but in a sense that if it is a 10 marks question and you have written 2 or 3 lines versus another who has written 5 pages but useless pages, and another who has written 2 pages but highly accurate pages, whom to give a mark? So he might be biased against a candidate who is writing just 2 lines, vis-a-vis a person who is writing 2 pages might secure better marks. So there has to be a very fine and a delicate balance when you are writing. Again, most of the students come up with a very basic question. I believe some of you might already have put it in the comment. Word limit. I have seen students counting the word limit. So let's say it's a 300 word limit question. Students would literally count each and every word in the line and see whether it is not crossing the word limit. Please don't do that. That is an unnecessary waste of time. Reason again being the same, examiner does not have that much time to count each and every answer of each and every copy. Okay. So what you need to do? Even if you want to have a rough estimate how much you should write, a good way is, let's write a sentence. I'll just move here and write a sentence. So I write a sentence. Today is a holiday. Today is Sunday. So let's say if this is my paper size and this is the statements I have written. What is a good way of approximation? I can just simply say, okay, in this page I am able to write 4 words in one line, and if I have to write, let's say, 400 words, I can have 100 such lines that I would have to write. So that is a quick way of approximation, even if you want to do that. Okay. Now, this is again not recommended. You can do it when you are practicing at your end, but once you practice, once you finish your practice, what would happen is you would be automatically able to comprehend how much you should write. The next important thing comes is handwriting. Now this is something you cannot change. Now we have a huge lot of handwriting that is given here. Now my question is for you. What do you think is the best handwriting? 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So there are various handwritings that are given. Now handwriting is not something based on which your answer copies would be judged, but definitely a legible, clear handwriting is must. There should not be no unnecessary cutting that has to be done. No unnecessary marks that have to be put up while you are writing. Okay, so that is again very important. Now, of these 5, Tiger Club has an answer 5 is good. Okay, Om has an answer 3 is good. Okay, now here I would explain you one very simple thing. Your handwriting should be legible. So being legible is the only requirement, I would say. Now what would happen in the case of 3? I believe this is a cursive writing. I believe you also believe this is a cursive writing. But the idea here is, sometimes these cursive writings do not score well because when you are writing cursive, you are making the content too much condensed. So let's say this is handwriting and I write it as handwriting. Again, what I am trying to do is I am condensing this. So when that is very much condensed, it is not clearly legible. Okay. This handwriting is clear, but the words are going up and down, so it's a kind of childish writing that is being seen. On the other hand, the remaining handwritings which we have seen here are relatively have individual words that are there. They are not cursive, but they are clearly legible. Okay, so make sure the items are not too much condensed, not too much spread apart, and the length of the words. Let's say you have the lines that are drawn here. Now sometimes when I write today, okay, and then the next sentence I again write today. So what is happening? This y and this y merges up. So your length of the words should be so that much that it do not cross the next line, the next words of the line. Okay. Also, they should not be too small and too big as recommended before. So handwriting is something that you cannot change at a given age, but you can take care that you are not writing too condensed, too big fonts that they are mixing up across the lines and it's practically not possible to read it. So those are some of the things that you must take into consideration while you are writing. The next is do a self-analysis, as I always say. So what do you think is interesting? Okay, write an answer, read it by yourself. Write the same answer again 2 days later, 3 days later and read it again. And compare which answer do you find interesting. Definitely, you would find a difference in your own writing. As I said, it is subjective. It's not an MCQ question so that the results would not vary. Because 2 days later, what might happen is you might read something else. You might have forgotten what you have written previously. And what you would write is something different. So compare, take the same question, write it on 2 different days and compare it. You would automatically see the difference and then you would be able to find out what appears more interesting to you. What appears more interesting to you would definitely be something what would appear more interesting to the examiner as well. So consider the things, the drawbacks that were there in one of the answers vis-a-vis the better points that were there in the other answer, and then try to take those into account for your future answers. So that's one very good way of self-analysis while you are writing your answers. Now here is one of the sample answers. I believe many of you won't be able to understand this question because it's from a higher level subject. Now the general idea is the question asks about a concept which is isostasy. Now you have to differentiate between the views of two scholars. So my idea here was to bring this answer because in the first paragraph what we have written is clearly identified what this term is and why this term is being used. Who proposed this term should be something that should not be introduced in the very beginning of the sentence. The very beginning should give an insight about it, why it is there and what it is about. Okay. In the next case, we have a difference that was asked. So you have the two theories and a comparative analysis. Now, since it's a comparative analysis, it's a good way to represent it in a tabular form. And when you have a tabular form, it's much more clear. Again, the most important aspects of those could be underlined. So this is one way under which you can actually bring in the focus of the examiner. So once I'm checking this copy, I instantly know, okay, these are the points that have been covered. So I need not to go into reading each of those lines. So highlighting it, underlining it, writing it with different colors is one of the ways, whatever is available in the given time period. Speed is again one of the key aspects, and then one diagram in both of those which explains the differences between the two, and finally a decent conclusion that is there. And this would explain why the same example of train we took in the starting is very, very applicable. Binny has another question, how to improve calculations, and how Kala has a question, how we can use diagrams and drawings to explain the answer. So Kala, here is one of the things that we have explained and one of the sample answers that we have picked up. And then regarding calculations, one of the very important things when you are coming with long answers, and let's say if it's a paper of mathematics and there is calculation involved, be sure that you are not skipping steps. Keep your answer stepwise, because in mathematics specifically, if you are skipping steps, if you are jumping from directly one equation to another equation, escaping the intermediate equation that is required, then you might lose points or you might lose marks on basis of that. Okay. There are requests for science lectures, so definitely science lectures are in development and many more would be coming soon. So that is something that we would be covering in the upcoming classes. Blaze has another question, how to improve handwriting and reduce spelling mistakes. So this question, reducing spelling mistakes, would come only through extensive reading. So try to read good authentic sources, try to read books, try to read newspapers, now e-newspapers definitely. So those would be some of the ways that would help automatically cut on the spelling errors. The next is how to improve your handwriting. Definitely at a given age, it becomes very, very difficult to work on handwriting and then work on the concepts and the content again. So what we would recommend is try to make your words much more legible, much more clear. Keep each of the words separate. By separate, I don't mean way apart, but yes, at a decent distance, so that each of the words is individually legible. Need not to practice cursive writing. Some of you start to practice cursive writing at a given age, so that's usually not recommended. That's something that that is totally fine. Definitely, Chintu, there is no such requirement that there is cursive writing which is must for board exams. You can also use non-cursive writing. Definitely, it's totally and totally fine. Okay, so those were some of the doubts that have come up, and definitely I believe this session was useful. As always, we would be meeting next Sunday 10:30 again with some of the interesting topics that has been recommended by you, and we would also be starting a series for drawing your diagrams quickly and neatly and proper labeled diagrams, how to work on that. So looking forward to see you in the upcoming sessions. Have a wonderful day ahead.